All right, let's get into it. I want to take a few minutes and discuss what this project's all about, what constitutes evidence for the project, how we organize the paper, and then finally, I want to provide you a little example of how we can get started so that you can get started. So to begin, what's this project all about? Well, if we look at the prompt, we can see that I've given you kind of a list to go through. And let me make this list even simpler. Let me reduce the 6 points here to 3 points. The first thing that we're doing is we're choosing a discourse group or a discourse community, and we're analyzing how that group uses language, right? And of course, when we say language, we're thinking about words, but we may also think about some of these visuals. And so that's really the first step. And then the second step is that we're thinking about what sorts of values or cultural narratives or ideologies underpin the way that they use language. And so that's step 2. And then step 3 is that we're taking that conversation about the values and we're connecting it to the culture. So we can reduce all of these points here to 3 points. We're analyzing language, we're discerning specific values and ideologies, and we're connecting those values or ideologies. So I know it's a little abstract now, but hopefully as we work through a project, you'll start to see how this works. Now, the first thing that we have to consider is where we get the evidence for the project. And if we look here, these are previous student projects. And so in all of these cases, the students had to bring in very specific evidence from the discourse itself. And what I mean by that is that if a student was doing a project on, for example, commercial country music, then the student needed to bring in specific lyrics from country music, right? That served as evidence of the discourse. Similarly, if a student was doing a project on, for example, the discourse of Trader Joe's, then that student had to go find, I'm going to pull this up. That student had to go find language of Trader Joe's. And so in this case, the student analyzed the Fearless Flyer, the Trader Joe's newsletter, and they had all sorts of things that they could take a look at. I had a student do the discourse of the Del Mar racetrack. And so that student hopped on to the Del Mar racetrack website and had access to all sorts of language and imagery, and they could build their case using that evidence. And so for us, the first really important point is to think, where do we get our evidence? And so if we come back here, once we've got our evidence, we can then do the analysis of it, and we can begin to complete that first section. And so let me speak for a second about that first section. In fact, let me take a step back and let me talk about the project as a whole. I've given you access to this document here. And this document lays out the project and what you'll be doing in each section. And so on this document, I've given you a thesis template, and then I've color-coded it, and I've given you explanations of what's happening in the blue section, the analysis section, the yellow section, the values and cultural narrative section, and the green section, the connection section. And so very quickly, I'd like to just explain this document. In the analysis section, everybody is going to bring in their evidence, and they're going to write analytical paragraphs about the patterns that they see in that evidence. I'll give examples of that in the next video. Once you've done that, in the next section, the values and ideologies section, you're going to take all of those points that you had made in your analysis paragraphs, and you're going to start to derive conclusions about the ideologies. And so, for example, if you see that the discourse that you're examining is constantly trying to push products, then when you talk about the values of the ideologies, you can connect it to this idea that this particular discourse is very much connected to the cultural narrative of buying in order to be, for example. And then finally, in the connection section, you're going to take those ideologies and those cultural narratives, and you're going to connect them to the culture at large. Okay? So here is a map, so to speak, of what happens throughout the project. So take a little bit of time and you can kind of read through and investigate that document. Now, let's take a little moment and let's see how we can get started on this project. And to do so, let's all agree that we want to analyze the discourse of, I don't know, maybe the GNC vitamin and supplement company. And so what we would do is we would first have to find evidence of the discourse. And so let's imagine that we go to the GNC website. Right? And we start to click around and we start to look at all of the information on the website. And remember that when we're doing this, we're looking for patterns. So for example, maybe we click on the vitamin section and we see that they have a male vitamin section, and we see that they have a female vitamin section. And when we look at this, we see that there are some distinctions. We see that there's a pattern in the male section, Mega Man, men's ripped, right? There's certain language that's being used there. We take a look at the female vitamin section and we see that they have different colors even on the packaging. And then we start to analyze even more, and we take a look, for example, at the language that they use on one of the male vitamin packages. And we see the Mega Man, but as we kind of look at this package, we also see language like clinical studied. We see that it highlights muscle function. And when we go down, we see that they even have this little symbol that says physician endorsed. And so we start thinking about all of that, and we think, okay, so they're highlighting muscles, and they're trying to create this credibility by bringing in physician endorsed, although we don't really know quite what that means. And then we take a look at some of the packaging on the female products, and we see that they use language like beauty. And so now we're thinking, wow, there's a big difference between highlighting beauty and muscle function. And so we start to think about those potential cultural narratives that are at play. We look at the language here and we see that it says clinically studied. And we think, that connects to that earlier idea about physician endorsed. And so we're just looking at all the language and we're starting to look for patterns. And so this is the sort of thing that I'm asking you to do as you get started with the project. I'm asking you to choose your company, right? Or choose your discourse, or choose your group. Take a look at the specific evidence that you can find and start to investigate some of the patterns and start to get a sense of what makes this discourse tick. I hope that this helps a bit, and in the next video I'll explain how this sort of thinking becomes writing. Take care.